Whether you're a fan of the original Dishonored or a Dishonored 2 enjoyer such as myself, chances are you might not have the highest opinion on Death of the Outsider, if you've even played it. But what if I told you that it's honestly pretty good and, dare I say, underrated? Is the game as good as its predecessors? Well, let's talk about it. Before we dive into it though, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We're really close to 2K, and it'd mean a lot to me if you helped me out. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the Dishonored series, either through my previous videos or through playing the games yourself. But to give a quick rundown on the previous games and my thoughts, Dishonored 1 is a phenomenal start to the series, from its level design to its gripping narrative about reclaiming the life that was stolen from you by people you thought you could trust. Twice. Throughout the game, you can watch the world slowly crumble and delve further and further into chaos and destruction, and you, somehow, have to pull it back from the brink of destruction. The atmosphere is genuinely unmatched in just about any game, and the powers you can use for the time are incredibly unique and fun to toy around with. The game also received some DLC that I'm fairly mixed on, if I'm honest. Knife of Dunwall felt unnecessary outside of the cutscene at the very end, and Brigmore Witches felt like an actual expansion on the themes and gameplay of the original title. Dishonored 2, while being a downgrade in atmosphere, is an upgrade in every other department, at least in my opinion. You have even more cool powers, a new game plus system, the ability to play as Corvo or Emily, the ability to mix and match their powers in repeat playthroughs as you see fit, and some of the best level design I've ever seen in a stealth game. If you know me at all, then you'd know it is my favorite in the series, and I genuinely believe the only reason it didn't take off in the same way the first game did was because the issues it had at launch were terrible and inexcusable. Hell, even I, the #1 Dishonored 2 glazer, didn't play the game until years after it had released because I was having troubles running it at launch. But that's a discussion to be had about the modern gaming business as a whole, and not for right now. Considering the overall lack of enthusiasm around Dishonored 2, it should be no surprise to anyone that Death of the Outsider isn't talked about much. I've met people who genuinely believe it's just DLC for the second game, but I think the game is different enough to warrant being its own standalone title, albeit it is much shorter than the previous two games, but hey, it's also half the price. Delving into the game itself, this time around we're playing as Billy Lurk, who, if you don't remember, is Dowd's second in command from the original game, as well as a major supporting character from the second, choosing to go by Megan Foster for most of that game's runtime. As this game opens up, we're given a quick rundown of Billy's backstory. She was an orphaned child taken in and raised by Dowd, who she then went on to betray, but in a shocking twist, instead of taking her head for her treacherous actions, he simply walks away and lets her go. Okay, maybe this is a bit quick to be jumping into criticisms, but
the assassin who ended one empress and saved another.
Didn't the Outsider say that nobody would ever know what Dowd did for Emily? And even if Dowd did tell his crew what he did, which I doubt, how exactly did Billy, who had been exiled at that point, figure out what Dowd did? I mean, it's a very minor point against the game. Like, I'm sure there is some explanation for it, but it does hamper the ending of Brigmore Witches for people to suddenly know that Dowd saved Emily. As Billy wakes up from sleeping on her desk, she talks about having a terrible nightmare of having her eye gouged out and her arm cut off, and how she's been having this exact same dream for weeks on end. But that doesn't matter now. The reason we've come to this port is to find our old mentor. After searching for months, Billy has heard rumors that the man is currently being held in place known as Albark's Baths. Before heading out on our mission, Billy remembers to grab the heart Daedra, her now dead lover, left her. This heart is interesting, but ultimately not very useful, at least in my opinion. It allows you to talk to rats who might give you useful information or an interesting tidbit. The problem is, they speak so cryptically, it's never clear what they're telling you is just a fun little world building or a clue on your current mission. While I find this feature endearing, it's one I don't bother using very much, which is a shame because I like the idea. I just wish the hints the rats are supposed to give were a bit more obvious. obvious. As we start to explore the streets, handling our very first ever guards in the game, I notice an open window above and decide to have a look around. Inside we can find a safe, and knowing my buddies over at Arcane, every time. It's here where we're introduced to bone charms. In case you aren't familiar with the series, these are essentially just trinkets you can equip to give yourself a boost in gameplay, some minor, some major. In a pretty big departure from the rest of the series, this is the only main collectible, as runes are simply not a thing in this game, and I'll explain why that is later. To make up for that though, there are a crap ton of bone charms. It genuinely feels like I can't take more than 5 steps without that pop-up appearing at the bottom of my screen. Once we're done robbing the place, we can step outside and head towards the actual bathhouse where, interestingly enough, no one here is actually hostile towards us. Yet, at least. As we delve further down, it doesn't take long until we find the man we're looking for, currently locked up beneath the floor by some machine. I'm not entirely sure since it's not really explained, but if I had to guess, it probably works the same way the music boxes the Overseers use work. Also, side note, kind of crazy they just stopped using those after the first game. Literally one of the best weapons against people with magic powers, and they just decide, nah, not worth using. Tangent aside, we need to get Dowd out, and unfortunately, we don't have the key needed to stop the machine. Fortunately though, security isn't super tight around here, and the upkeep is even worse, so I take the opportunity to sneak upstairs through the massive hole in the ceiling in the bathroom. From there, I'm able to knock out the owner, steal her key, and get Dowd out, where he immediately takes care of everyone in the building. An interesting observation I made was that Dowd, despite having every reason to, didn't kill anyone in his rampage. You can check out everyone inside, and all Dowd did was simply knock them out. I actually think this is a really cool character development moment for him. Dowd from the first game would not have hesitated to kill everyone in here. Hell, that amount of death would have been a regular Tuesday to him. Now though, after his encounters with Corvo, Dowd is much more hesitant to take lives needlessly, even if he would be justified in doing so. Also, I didn't know where to put this, so I'm just going to drop it here. This game introduced contracts. These are essentially just side quests we can do in order to get more money. These can range from needing to kill a target, to stealing, to kidnapping. For this mission, our 2 contracts are to kill a dog and burn the body, and sabotage the brewery they have inside the joint. Easy enough for the first couple of contracts, and if it wasn't clear, I am once again doing a clean hands ghost run for this playthrough, despite there being no real reason to. Well, at least for the clean hands. There is still an achievement for going ghost, but there is no chaos system, meaning, unlike the previous games, the world and the story do not change no matter how many people you slice up. This could be considered a bad thing by some, but honestly, I don't mind the change. I'm one of those people who has never bothered doing a high chaos run in any of the games, and I more so choose to do clean hands out of challenge rather than to get the good ending of the games. Still, I can understand why this might bother some, as it can lead to feeling like the game has a lack of consequences, but the way I see it, Billy only has one major target in the game. Everyone else is a small fry in comparison, and Billy herself is a small fry. She's not a world-class assassin, a future empress, or the parent of said future empress. She was only ever a street urchin raised assassin. Her taking a few lives is hardly anything that she hasn't done before. It also helps that the main antagonists in the game are a fairly evil, seclusive group, so it's not really a moral quandary taking them out. Back to the mission though, once we've freed Dowd and he's taken out his captors, he tells us he's got one more job to do.
The one responsible for it all. The cults, the black magic, this mark on my hand. We're gonna kill the black-eyed bastard himself.
Once Dowd is teleported off and we finished our side contracts, we can sneak past the newly posted guards both outside the bathhouse and at the rail station above, making our way back to the Dreadful Whale and capping off the first successful mission. Overall, I think this mission is an incredibly strong intro to the game. Genuinely my favorite opening in the series, if I'm honest. Yeah, the prison escape is iconic, and the escape from the overrun tower was pretty cool, but I really enjoy that this game starts with an infiltration rather than an an escape, and the payoff of rescuing Dowd and watching him absolutely decimate everyone in the bathhouse was easily one of the highlights of the game to me. It does such an excellent job at showing Dowd to be this impossible force with godlike powers, and immediately comparing that to the man we meet on the boat, an old, washed up, dying man, is honestly surreal. It really makes you wonder what he was like back in his prime. Speaking of being back on the boat, after we finish our little nap, we're greeted by an oh so familiar presence, the Outsider himself. Since Billy doesn't want the mark, or at least the Outsider assumes she doesn't, he decides to instead replace her arm and eye with really strange void equivalents, making it impossible for her to blend into a crowd ever again. More importantly though, while this may not be the Outsider's mark, it does serve much the same purpose in giving Billy supernatural void powers, and they're an interesting bunch. The first power is displacement. Billy is able to put down a marker, and by reactivating the ability, she can teleport to it. At first, this just seems like Blink with extra steps, but it does have a couple of points over Blink. The first one being that you can sort of plan an escape route with it. If you plan to do something risky, you can have your teleport ready to go, do the thing, then teleport away instantly, not having to worry about aiming. But the really cool thing about displacement is how it interacts with Billy's second power, Foresight. Foresight is Billy's equivalent of dark vision, but instead of a toggle you can use to see through walls and mark important objects, instead, Billy takes the chance to have an out-of-body experience and scout around, meaning this ability is much better used for planning your route and preparing rather than a toggle you should always have on. But the really cool thing is that you can place a displacement marker while you're scouting, allowing you to reach places you normally couldn't. And with displacement, so long as you're in range and can see the marker, you're able to teleport to it, which is my only real complaint with the power, if I'm honest, that you have to be able to see it. If you could put the power behind a closed door then teleport it, I think it'd really help Billy stand out more from Corvo and Emily. Instead, it sort of just ends up being the Blink we have at home. It's still better than Far Reach though, I will give the game that much credit. Also, going to throw this in here, yes, I know displacement can be used to hurt and or kill people if you teleport into their spot, but we're doing clean hands, so that application is literally worthless to me. Billy's next power is honestly my favorite in the game and one of the most interesting in the series, Semblance. This power allows you to steal the face from an NPC, turning them into a disguise. I completely forgot about this power in my original Dishonored video, and man, I can't imagine why. It's so damn cool, and in my opinion, absolutely makes up for the rest of Billy's kit being really small, as this is her last power. Yeah, this game only introduces 3, but I think the synergy between displacement and foresight and the utility of semblance really makes up for the lack of powers. These powers are not able to be upgraded either, hence why there are no runes to collect throughout the game. Another interesting mechanic to these powers to help set them apart is that, unlike the other 2 games, the mana system here doesn't need to be refilled with items. It simply recharges over time, meaning this game really expects you to use these powers. As a result, I don't know if a Flesh and Steel run is actually viable in this game. At least, it's not easily done. If you've ever done one before, please let me know how it went in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. As a side note, this game does have an original game plus mode, which does allow you to use some of the powers from Dishonored 2 during your playthrough. Namely, it allows you to use Blink, Dark Vision, and Domino. I don't particularly mind Blink or Dark Vision, as you already have equivalents of those in your toolkit, but Domino, in my opinion, probably would end up messing with the balance of the game. Not that I know too much about it though, as for this run through, I decided to stick with vanilla. Maybe a future stream. With that out of the way, we can continue on with the actual mission. As things start off, and after Dowd gets acclimated to our new look, he tells us he's found a way to kill the Outsider. There was a knife used many years ago to turn a street urchin into a god, and now it's the only thing that can be used to defeat that very same god. The same cult that made him still have that very same blade in their possession, so now the plan is to track down the leaders and figure out where they've hidden it. As we set out into the streets of Karnaca with our new powers in tow, we begin our search for these mysterious leaders of the cult known as the Eyeless. But first things first, we need to stop by the black market, both to pick up some supplies for the mission, as well to go ahead and take up some contracts for work. For this mission, I went ahead and knocked out the side missions first, and man, let me tell you, what a massive pain in the ass that was. This is probably my strongest critique in the game. The side missions are just not worth doing. The reward is just some extra money, but since you can find most supplies you need throughout the mission and the upgrades aren't that necessary, that's not the best incentive. They're fun, at least, right? Well, I end up skipping some just because they require me to kill, and, well, you know, can't do that. As for the ones I can do, some of them are alright, but most of the time it ends up being a much bigger pain than the reward is worth. Seriously, getting these two guys out of this one building later in the level is such a massive pain in the ass. There's only one exit, at least that I could spot. Yes, there is an exit upstairs, but since that has a loading screen, we can't take any unconscious bodies with us. This means, essentially, my only option is to slowly, one at a time, knock out every single person downstairs. It's a massive pain, and these contracts are the reason why after this mission, I never bothered doing any more throughout the rest of the game. It just isn't worth it. That being said, as we continue on through the level, we heard from Dowd that the Eyeless are getting tattooed in a shop known as the Red Camilla. So stopping by, I noticed the door is locked, and using foresight, we can sneak through the vent and place our displacement mark on the other side of the glass, and since we can see through the glass, we can actually use this to teleport inside. Honestly, one of the coolest applications of this power. Once we're inside, we can find the tattoo gun, and deciding that, despite the fact we have a weird-ass void arm and red eye, we can tattoo ourselves to fit in with the rest of the cult. Shockingly enough, this does actually work for getting you into the bar, if you take that route. I, instead, decide to break into the nearby singer's house by disguising myself as his girlfriend, using the secret knock, then sneaking upstairs. From here, we can actually knock out the guards protecting his safe, where he keeps one of the bank keys. Oh, he was a higher up in the Eyeless. I forgot to mention that part. Unfortunately, the mechanism locking the safe isn't a simple number combination, it's a voice match, and even worse, semblance might give us the man's face, but not his vocal cords, so that plan won't work either. Luckily, he did put a player right next to his safe, but it's not that simple. We also need a very specific song to open it up. It doesn't look like he was kind enough to leave that song in the music player, so I ride the dumbwaiter down and luckily get taken to the room that happens to be powering the electric floor I saw earlier, and unplugging that, I am able to sneak inside, grab another song, and feeling lucky, I decided to go back and test it. Thankfully, this time, it's the correct jam, and I'm able to grab my loot and head out. Our next main target is going to be a city administrator under the name of Ivan Jacoby. As we stop by his office, we can see that he's unfortunately out and apparently at a public square giving a speech.
Stays closed. I don't want to fall through in the middle of my speech.
You heard Mr. Jacoby. Close the damn trapdoor already.
Yes, sir. Would you want...
What's the matter with you? I'll have a look.
Key acquired, we can stop back at his office, grab some notes, as well as this damning evidence of a comically large beaker of blood. Good lord, dude, this is just excessive. Before returning to the ship, I decide to stop by the journalist's office in order to drop off this said incriminating evidence, take my pay, and with that, we're officially done with the game's second mission. Overall, the actual main mission was pretty fun. I enjoyed the mansion bit and the part with the knocking Jacoby off the platform. The issue for me stems from the side content, namely anything to do in that damn bar. Seriously, going through there undetected was an absolute nightmare. Having to lure out each individual member one at a time until I had everyone knocked out cold was just miserable and extended my playtime on this mission threefold. Still, overall, I enjoyed myself. I just don't recommend going after the contracts. I also think it's weird that, like, nobody ever mentions Billy's weird ass looking eye or arm. Maybe I don't interact with the random NPCs enough, but I know if I saw someone that looked like this, I'd do everything I could to avoid her, if not outright screaming and running in the opposite direction. When we get back to the ship, we meet up with Dowd and plan our infiltration of the bank. Having never been successfully stolen from before, it seems like we'll have quite the task on our hands. We've got 3 main points of entry, and most interestingly, there's a valve on the roof that connects to the ventilation system, which is something we definitely want to keep in mind. What I find kind of intriguing is the conversation with Dowd himself after. At first, I'm not the biggest fan of Dowd in this story, namely, why he wants to kill the Outsider. It seems like he takes absolutely no accountability for his actions. He blames the Outsider for the things he did. Yes, Dowd could not have done the awful things he did without the powers granted to him by the Outsider, but at the end of the day, that was his choice. In fact, why does nobody in the story ever bring up Corvo or Emily? They were given the same opportunities as Dowd and just as much power, yet they didn't choose to use it capriciously like Dowd did. Hell, this is even the entire reason Dowd changed his ways in Knife of Dunwall and beyond. But I do think Dowd brings up a good point, and this is some food for thought. The Outsider does not pick who bears his mark at random. He is very deliberate with his choices. According to the lore, only 8 people in written history have ever bared his mark. Considering how long he's been around, that's not very many. And to defend Dowd's point here, yeah, it's probably not smart to give one person the power to make anyone he chooses into essentially a demigod, especially when you look at the people he has chosen: Dowd, Granny Rags, Delilah, Corvo, and most recently Emily. I think the reason the Outsider chose these people in particular had nothing to do with their alignments, but rather their potential to sow chaos into the world. While Corvo and Emily did ultimately choose good, we can see that they're the exception rather than the rule. Most everyone else who obtained this mark made the world worse off with their powers. I don't think the Outsider gave them his mark for that specific reason. Rather, he did it to see what someone who had the capability and motivations to make the world worse off would do if given the powers. Would they use it to improve their own lives at the cost of everyone else's around them? Or would they choose to try and right the wrongs in the world and help it? I think there is a valid conversation to be had here that no one singular person should have the capability to grant whoever they want to have godlike powers, and that should be the angle Dowd goes for, not the I did bad things because the Outsider gave me powers. Because at the end of the day, Dowd, that shit's on you. The Outsider gave you a loaded gun, but you're the one that pointed that at innocent people and pulled the trigger. I honestly don't understand why Dowd takes zero accountabilities for the decisions that he made. Regardless, I can see where he's coming from and can agree to an extent that the Outsider needs to be taken care of. As we move through the level, I decide to stop by the black market, not to get contracts, I really do not care about those, but to pick up some supplies. The important thing here though is the poppy tincture. This is essentially sleeping gas and will be extremely useful later on, even if it's a bit pricey. The hardest part of the bank heist is, funnily enough, actually getting inside. There's a few ways in, but my choice for infiltration is through the roof, which is a bit of a pain to get to because we need to ride the elevator up. Easy enough, right? Well... ugh. So I go back, find the whale oil station, plug in the power, now we can ride the elevator to the roof. Before stepping inside though, make sure to drop the poppy tincture into the ventilation system. Doing so, we can step inside, and as a result of the tincture, everyone is out cold, making this mission much easier. Once we step into the inner sanctum, we're met with the bank's only real challenge now that everyone is asleep, namely that there is a clockwork soldier roaming the premises. Thankfully though, they're severely nerfed from their counterparts in the second game. These ones can't actually see behind them, only what's in front, so sneaking past them really isn't that hard. After rewiring the wall of light, allowing us to slip through, and we go into the basement, and seeing an old friend here, I decide to let him know we're thinking about him. From there, we can move the massive elevator and bank vault to the director's office, and before going into the safe, we can actually press this super secret button, opening up some more secrets behind this painting. From there, we can open up the safe, and with the 2 keys we acquired earlier, we're able to open up our main safe. As we grab the knife we're looking for, we're greeted once again by the outsider, who tells us in no uncertain words that something has happened to Dowd. Before he can elaborate though, he leaves just as quickly as he came, leaving Billy frustrated. Also, as a note, this knife is what we end up using for the rest of the game, and besides having a cool animation when we pull it out, or switch between crouching and standing, it also has a unique power. While not the most practical thing in the world when it comes to Clean Hands Ghost Run, this does have its purposes, and it's definitely fun to use. Don't look at me, I'm not looking up the code. I would never. I figured this out on my own. Yeah, so apparently this is based on the Fibonacci sequence, and good God, I don't exactly have that memorized, so I'm not exactly upset about Googling this one. Sorry, bros. And considering the rewards, I think cheating was worth it. Just this once. The bank properly robbed, we're able to slip back into the night and head back to the Dreadful Whale, another job well done. This is probably my favorite mission in this game. It's nowhere near the highs of the second game, but maybe this is controversial. I enjoyed it more than any singular level in the first game. Oh, I can feel that angry mob coming for me now. Let me explain. I actually enjoy the puzzles in here, I like the aesthetics, and I love how short and sweet it is. When you ignore the side missions anyway. I also really enjoyed the part where you have the ability to just not deal with any guards. I think giving me the option in future playthroughs to potentially challenge myself by not using that method is super cool, and also the different entryways for the bank allowing you to go in however you want, I also think is super fucking neat. Overall, cool level and the highlight of the game for me. As we return to the ship, it's with a heavy heart we find Dowd dead after a long and tenuous life. Billy decides it's best to give Dowd a proper burial at sea along with her ship, and sets both aflame before heading off to her next mission at the Royal Conservatory. In the last mission, we discovered that someone had run off with important information from the Eyeless cult and had managed to get that to the Royal Conservatory before the gang had managed to catch back up with him. But with any luck, whatever he managed to find is still here, and we can hopefully figure out how to get into the void. Though, once again, things can never be that easy. Now we have to deal with the Abbey of the Everyman infesting the place, along with their sisters of the Oracular. Don't worry, they're not more dangerous or anything. In fact, you would think the blindfolds would make them easier to sneak past, but no. They have some weird powers or whatever that allows them to see anyway, so for all intents and purposes, they're just regular guards. As we sneak upstairs, we hear about Sister Rosewin, a high-ranking member of the Sisters, and as we spy on the different members, we see she's attempting to have a meeting with Overseer Cardoza, the Vice Overseer, and thinking I can be clever, I try to disguise myself as him in order to attend the meeting.
Very well.
What
You
is
seem
going on?
feverish.
So I looked it up, and apparently you're supposed to be able to get what you need from Sister Rosewin by doing this, but I either messed up by knocking out the other sisters, or the game bugged or something. Either way, this means it's time for Plan B. We sneak behind Sister Rosewin, and before grabbing the 2 terabyte file, I set up an escape on top of the banner. The reason being, the instant I grab it, she and every other NPC around her is immediately alerted. Thankfully, they don't spot me that quickly, but I only have a couple of seconds to get away. After that train wreck, the rest of the level is a breeze. This is a silvergraph, meaning I'm gonna need a projection screen in order to see what's on it. Luckily, there happens to be a machine in this building, and after taking out the 3 guards in the room with it, we can slip it in for movie night. The silvergraph shows us an old, thought to be abandoned mine left in the middle of a mountain. With this, we're able to deduce where we need need to go to finally put an end to things. With that done, I decide to make one more stop before heading to our final destination. I go to this apartment directly connected to the conservatory, and using foresight to travel through the vent, I'm able to place a marker behind the counter in the black market. From there, I can travel down to said market and take out the shopkeeper, getting all the stuff I want for free. With that done, we can hop into our makeshift apartment, ending the mission. Overall, other than that one part where I got screwed over by the sisters and had to brute force my sailing of the silver graph, I thought this mission was alright. Nothing amazing, but also nothing terrible. Just another solid one. Though, I will admit, robbing that black market will always be a good time. Moving on to the final mission of the game, and of the series as a whole, we find ourselves in a little hole in the wall right outside some decrepit buildings, currently being guarded by some dogs. 1 second.
This place already.
Currently unguarded, but there's something off about this place. As we move further in, it doesn't take long before we start seeing people and how they've been affected by their stay here, with these strange hardened patterns on their bodies, reminiscent of the void. They're also not very kind or forgiving, as they don't hesitate to kill one of their members who begins to have second thoughts about living the cult life. It's brutal. Well, I can't kill them, but I do decide to knock them out for their transgressions, and boy howdy am I glad that I did, because there's this elevator we need to ride, but we need a lot more weight to be able to get up there, and unfortunately Billy just isn't thick enough to trigger it on her own. So I go back, collect our friends, including this handsome fella here, and dropping them on the elevator, we're able to activate the mechanism and ride this bad boy all the way to the top. Sneaking through the grating here, we're introduced to easily the coolest design enemies in the game, called the Envisioned. These guys look like they were carved out from the void itself, and I absolutely love their animations. But ignoring them for the time being, we're able to sneak on further into the cult's base of operations, hearing rumors of occultists who seem to learn too much. Keeping that in mind, we move on until we find ourselves in the heart, or should I say, the eye of the encampment. See, because there's this eye here in the middle of the base. It's a joke. Touching the eye, Billy Lurk is now, as far as I can tell, both in the void and not in the void. Or at the very least, she's capable of seeing into the void. And one of the very first things you'll see in this new void site is a body. Checking on it, we can grab a key out of his pocket. Now, here's the hard part. Before we touch the eye, the Envisioned did not care about us. They simply went on about their day. Now though, yeah, and these guys are bastards too. If you're anywhere close to them, they can sense you. And semblance? Doesn't fucking work. The toughest part though is immediately after you touch the eye. Good God, I struggled with this for a solid 20 minutes, and it honestly felt more like dumb blind luck that I did rather than through skill or ingenuity. God, I hated this part. The rest of the level is pretty cool though. We go back to the place where we heard about the member who learned too much, and we're now able to enter this locked room. Inside, we can see our man was a little bit obsessed with the outsider. Cracking the code to the safe, we're able to read his journal, and we learn the mark the outsider leaves on people is his name, which he lost when the eyeless performed the ritual on him over 4,000 years ago. And if someone could read the name to him, he'd lose his position as a god and become human once again. The problem is, the mark is written in the language of the dead, and well, we're not dead, but we do have a game plan now, so we make our way towards the final confrontation. Managing to sneak my way past a couple more Envisioned, who are like a million times easier to get past than the first one. Oh my god, I'll never get over how rough that first one was. As we move in, we find ourselves in the ritual hold, the very place where the outsider was created. As we approach the man-made god, we don't see some evil tyrant on a throne, nor an unstoppable force. It's a man stuck in stone, seemingly in pain. I think this really puts into perspective that the outsider never asked for his lot in life. He was just some kid on the street before being forcibly taken by a mad cult, thrust into a role he could not have possibly been prepared for. And honestly, who knows all the things he was forced to witness and forced to endure. Not that any of that justifies what he's done or his lack of action. As a god, he has all the power to change the world for the better, but he actively chooses not to. Not to mention, he specifically only gives his powers and attention to the people who are down on their luck and have the motivation to sow chaos with their demigod-like powers. Still though, who knows how much of that is the street urchin and how much of that is the void corrupting the boy. And you might notice among the outsider, there are a few spirits, and within their ranks, we can even see our dear mentor Dowd. My guess is that everyone here was once a bearer of the outsider's mark, and as payment for their gift, they're now forced to spend their afterlife with him. Speaking with Dowd, he tells us that we need to finish what we started, but we argue with the man. We really take the time to try and convince him, and he tells us no, so we go and stab the outsider.
This is how it always ends.
Kidding, of course. But I do want to take a moment to talk about this. While I am personally okay with the removal of the chaos system, I can understand some people's disappointment that the ending for this game is decided entirely by a single binary decision at the very end of the game. Whether you're a saint throughout, never harming a single soul, or a bloodthirsty sociopath, literally does not matter. The only decision that matters is the choice between killing the outsider or convincing Dowd to save him. Personally, I don't mind this, but I would have appreciated a different approach. If the ending was going to be done this way, I think it would have been better if you had to build towards it throughout the entire game. Make decisions through each mission that would allow you to eventually save the outsider, rather than have a single conversation at the very end of the game. The conversation is long though, and you really need to convince Dowd to spare the outsider. Since we can't read the language of the dead, we can't give the outsider his name back, but Dowd, now recently deceased, can read the language of the dead. And again, it's insane to me that Dowd, a previous bloodthirsty assassin who was given a second chance to change and be better, is so against the idea of the outsider being given the same opportunity. I do not understand why Dowd blames the outsider and the outsider alone for the actions that he made. I also do not understand why Dowd, who has turned a new leaf at this point in his life, is so against giving this man a way out that doesn't involve killing him, especially when he deliberately chose to spare all the cult members earlier in the game. Still, with enough persuasion, Dowd can be convinced to reading out the outsider's name to him, freeing him from his role as a god and giving him the chance at life he was denied all those centuries ago. And as Dowd fades away and the newly born again outsider takes a step into the mortal world, we cap off the game and this amazing series. For my final thoughts, I believe Death of the Outsider is a serviceable ending. I have my issues with it, certainly. I think Dowd acts fairly out of character. I genuinely wish anyone would bring up how Corvo and Emily were given the exact same opportunities as him, yet chose to use those opportunities to better the world around them, not just enrich their own lives. I think the level design here is a downgrade from the second game, and not even as good as the first in a lot of cases, and I think the side content is just not worth doing once you've gotten some decent bone charms under your belt. But with all that said, I think the set pieces this game offers is unmatched, and I do think there are interesting points brought up about how there should never be one singular person who makes major decisions for everyone, and how this could theoretically be used as evidence to dismantle the monarchy. Sure, Jessamine and Emily were good people, but Delilah Delilah and the Lord Regent nearly destroyed the entire country practically overnight. And do we really want to hedge the future of this entire empire over whether or not the next monarch is an asshat? I also really enjoy the selection of powers we have this go around. Sure, they're not the flashiest bunch, but I think they're some of the most creative in the series, and maybe this is controversial, but I genuinely believe Billy is the best protagonist we've ever had. To have a character as full of regrets as she is, someone who is genuinely doing her best to move forward and who we've seen grow, not only in this game, but in the previous two, has genuinely made me appreciate her more than I do Emily or even Corvo. Overall, I think this game is a worthy ending to the series, even if I think it is not as good as the previous two entries, and if you're a fan, I think you owe it to yourself to at least do a playthrough. There is genuinely a lot to love, and I think Arcane made the right call to end the series here. Also, just because I have a feeling people will ask, I'd rank the series something like this, and I'll even throw in the DLCs from the first game for funsies. At the top, I'd put Dishonored 2. After experiencing all the games and what they have to offer, I genuinely respect everything that game did and then some. It's such a fun game, and easily my favorite stealth game. If I were to give it a ranking, I'd say it'd be a solid 9 out of 10. Truly fantastic. Immediately under that, I'd put the original game. Dishonored was a groundbreaking title when it released, and the fact that we can still sit here and talk about it for, oh god, should honestly speak for itself. The game's atmosphere is unmatched, and the characters and level design aren't too far behind. While I think some things haven't aged the best, the game is worth no less than an 8 out of 10. Overall, I still love this game. After that, I'd put the second DLC from the original game, the Brigmore Witches, a fun continuation of the original game and a fun origin story to the villain Delilah we saw in the second game. It was also really cool seeing Dowd grow as a character from being an unfeeling murder machine to a man trying his best to right some of the wrongs he's committed. I'd give this one a 7 out of 10. After that, I'd put Death of the Outsider, certainly one of the most flawed experiences in the series, but also one of the most unique. I'd give this game another solid 7 out of 10, and while it's probably a more complete package than Brigmore Witches due to being a fully released game and all, I think the flaws this game has are just enough to edge it below that third place spot. And at the very bottom, I'd put the first DLC for the original game, Knife of Dunwall. Overall, this expansion just felt pointless. Literally nothing important happens in the narrative aside from the very end where Billy turns on Dowd, and while the level design is certainly serviceable, it's nothing that's gonna blow you away. It also doesn't help that Dowd just feels exactly like Corvo in this DLC, with no real powers to call his own. Overall, I'd still give it a 6 out of 10. It's still good, but I don't see myself replaying it unless I plan to binge the entire series again. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and my final trip down memory lane with the Dishonored franchise. This series is near and dear to my heart, and I love every single one of these games. Sure, some are better than others, but I believe each and every one of them deserves to be remembered as not only great stealth games, but fantastic video games. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.